And we're back after a brief break. You're watching Attorney Joe Flores on South Texas Crossfire. Don't forget, special thanks to our broadcasters, the Lopez family, and my good friend, Carlos Lopez. You guessed it, the Ted Turner of broadcasting here in South Texas, right here on KTMV, right between ABC and NBC affiliates. 300,000 strong watching us. No pressure. With me today, I've got Steve McMains, attorney extraordinaire. How you doing, Steve?
Doing good, and you?
Now, Steve, I'm not going to be biased. We're buddies, and we practice in the federal system, but I'm going to be asking you some hardball questions. And federal judges sometimes tune in.
Good.
So no pressure.
Not at all.
Let's go. Feet first. Okay, well, we're going to be talking about the federal system, but first off, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and where you come from.
Well, I'm originally from Corpus Christi. Grew up here. Went to University of Texas for undergrad. Then went to
Horns.
Go Horns. Went to SMU for law school, and then came back here. Originally started working for the city as a prosecutor, and then worked for the Greenberg law firm, which was one of the older law firms for a while until that disbanded, and then worked for Heartline, Dacus, Barger, Dry, and Kern, and then have been on my own, had my own practice for the last 6 years. Doing primarily criminal defense work, a lot of federal criminal defense work, and I also represent a bunch of bars and restaurants doing TABC licensing.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, what, the Greenberg Law Firm was established in 1100 or something? No, I mean, it was around for a long time. Now, since it's kind of been restructured,
correct.
Some people went different ways, and you worked with Daryl Barger and some other people, got some good trial training and good litigation experience. And tell us a little bit about your days at the city as a city prosecutor.
Well, mostly, I mean, you're hearing Class C misdemeanors. There's a lot of traffic tickets, PIs, a lot of that kind of stuff.
Simple assault.
Exactly.
And so you got some trial experience, because I know in there it's the Wild West. It's like the set of Deadwood. I mean, you just go.
No, it's nonstop. I mean, yeah, it's definitely, you're handling a lot of cases. It goes very fast. So.
What I admire about you most is you never look frazzled, Steve. I mean, you know, when we handle federal criminal, it can be brutal in there because of some of the people that we are representing. It's not exactly minor league ball. Not
at all, and especially the two federal judges we have here in this district are two of the smartest judges, you know, I've been around, and you know, they're going to throw some tough questions at you, so you have to be prepared when you go in there. There's a lot of attorneys that don't want to go in there and be willing to put up with that kind of scrutiny, in the sense that you have to know what you're doing. You have to know the guidelines, you have to know the law behind it, and the judges are going to be just as hard on the prosecutors as they are the defense attorneys.
And I've seen that every day, day in, day out. I see that they will ask the hard questions of the U.S. attorney. It's not like a lay down. They're going to say, why are you charging this person? And I've seen, we're going to talk about the guidelines a little bit. A lot of people don't understand how the federal system works. So let's talk about that. Let's start with the mechanics of that. You get, somebody hires you, or the federal system calls you up and says, will you take this client? Then what happens?
Well, I think it's first to start, I mean, important to start off with, I think it's really important in the federal system. Any criminal case, it's important, whatever activity that is corresponded to you involving with the government, you've got to hire or talk to a lawyer quickly, because the earlier on in the case, the more options you have and the more options the system provides. The later it goes on, the fewer options you have. And so I think before you even talk about the guidelines, I think you've got to get in there, because what the U.S. attorney even charges you with is going to be, you know, dependent upon, you know, early on in the case. And so you need to, you know, advice from a lawyer very early on. And the guidelines, you know, once you plead guilty, the guidelines are very strict and very rigid as far as the point system they do. Now, the judges aren't obviously required to do it by the guidelines, but they are required to look at the guidelines and consult the guidelines.
And invariably, they're going to really look at them, and you know, over half the time, they're going to go by the guidelines or more.
Yeah, I mean, I think 90% plus time, in my experience, is the judges do go by the guidelines. I mean, so the guidelines are what they are, and you know, the judge has some flexibility, but for the most part, they do go by the guidelines, and that's why, you know, we're required to know them. You and I both know we have to know those things backwards and forwards. And when it comes to, you know, sentencing, that's what you're going to get most of the time. And
for ladies and gentlemen out there, that we're referring to the guidelines. They're the United States Sentencing Guidelines, and they're issued, and they have. It's almost sometimes a cookie cutter kind of deal, where if you have so many arrests, or you've got so many DWIs, or you have violent offenses, that goes towards your criminal history points. And then the offense that you have goes down one scale. It's like 1 through, you know, oh, God forbid, 50 points. And then it goes by Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And that goes your criminal history onto the right, and your offense down here. Now, if you've got a lot of pre-existing things, charges for firearms.
Well, not only that,
or
but
felonies.
And it depends if you're currently on probation.
Exactly.
I mean, if you've gotten probation for cases, those can be held against you. Criminal history is a very complicated deal. And it's one of those things where early on when you talk to a client, when you first get hired on a case or first get asked to handle a case, someone's always asking you, what am I looking at type deal. And one of the hardest questions is that criminal history, because a lot of people,
I can't tell you what you're going to get, brother. I mean, until the guideline comes out.
Exactly. But I mean, criminal history is a very, and it's one of those very important things to look into, and making sure your attorney looks into those, if they are convictions, how long ago they were, how old they were, because after a certain period of time, they don't go against the guidelines. I mean, past 10 years typically, is one of those things. But it's very different. It's not when you got in trouble 10 years ago. It's when you got out. When your sentence stopped, or when your probation ended, type deal.
And let's use a concrete example. Somebody gets caught for illegal entry. A lot of people out here are very passionate about people coming back to this country, getting deported. They come back, and it's not 20, 30 years ago. I was having a conversation with somebody when I was a little boy. Remember, we'd pick up somebody on the side of the road that was hitchhiking to go to Houston or going to work on a ranch. Then they'd go back to Mexico. Now the same guys are saying, oh, I'm just coming here to, work at a meatpacking plant illegally. But they really have a history of drug trafficking, murder, kidnapping. You're finding a lot more tough, mean guys that are in that pack that are trying to say they're the same guys coming to work in a taqueria in Houston.
Sure. I mean, it's definitely a lot of different people. I mean, I was handling a case this last week where the person involved that was transported, he was in a gang in Mexico, and the person, involved in the transporting was a gang member down in the valley, and they had an altercation. So I mean, it's definitely a very different scope from a few years ago.
Well, let's talk about your cases that you handle that have the people that are gang members. They come in with the pretty light 0 to 12 month sentencing guideline for entering this country second, third time illegally, but then you discover they had gang affiliation, they've done kidnapping, suspected of murder, drug trafficking. Then they go through what's called a PSI, or pre-sentencing investigation report, if they plead guilty for entering, and they keep on hounding you. Mr. McMains, what's my sentence? What am I going to get on the guidelines? What do you tell them?
Well, I tell them it really depends on your criminal history, especially in those illegal reentry cases, because, I mean, those go up dramatically, as you know, once you have those felony convictions on there. And you get some minimum times where you can be looking at minimums of 5 years and up sometimes, and it's one of those tough situations where that criminal history is very important when you're talking about those illegal reentry cases. It's sometimes extremely unfair in one sense. I don't know what the percentage is in the federal prisons, but I mean, there's a large percentage of people that are being held just because of the situations just like that.
And they have to serve about 85% of their time. This is not like state court.
No, there's not any kind of parole in the federal system. So you're serving about 80% of the time. You get about 2 months per year for what they call good time if you qualify. And that's essentially what you get off. I mean, you're serving it. It's kind of like, if people are familiar with the state system, it's kind of like state jail. It's essentially day for day. There's no parole in the federal system.
How do you prepare for that then? I mean, like you said, we've got some great federal judges, but they are tough. I mean, when you prepare for sentencing and try to get outside that guideline, like you said, it's advisory. The judge pretty much has the discretion to give that guideline sentence, say 36 to 54 months, 91 to 115 months. How do you break that through your advocacy to try to have the judge entertain perhaps departing down from the mandatory minimum?
Well, I think obviously each situation is unique, but I think you've got to take your client into consideration in the sense of what he wants to accomplish and how he's going to change his life. Because if it's a pattern where he's been in trouble lots of times before, is it a drug problem, or are you going to seek drug treatment while in the federal system? They do have a very good drug treatment program, but you have to basically be incarcerated for over 36 months to qualify for that program. So, it's kind of tailored to each client as far as what kind of situation is. Is it an education issue? Is it an issue with family? Is it an issue to work? I mean, it's as important to get a recommendation of where he's going to be placed, because obviously the Bureau of Prisons can place you throughout the United States. I mean, is it something where we need to have this person get out of a bad situation he is in South Texas and get away from friends or gang members and have him placed with family closer to in a different state? There's a lot of different things, and I think the judges really kind of look at, is this person capable of that kind of change, and what's he going to do to change? If you're sincere in how you're going to turn your life around, I think they'll entertain that. I think when you get in situations where you get the kind of generic, I'm sorry, Your Honor, and I'm sorry to society, that's, they hear that every day. And it's got to be something genuine about how they're going to change their life.
Well, let me ask you, we've got a couple of minutes left, but here's a very interesting case, and I know you've handled it too. Person was brought in here illegally when they were 6 months old. They went to high school here. They get busted with a little cocaine, wrong place, wrong time. The cocaine's in a car with their 3 other buddies. Their 3 other buddies may get a pretrial diversion or something, but they say, you're illegal. Now we're going to deport you to Mexico where you don't even speak the language and you got to go back. How do you wrestle with something like that?
It's a tough situation, and I think the federal judges realize that, and they can take that, especially in a federal case, they can take that into account as far as extra harm in regards to what's going to happen as far as their deportation. And so that's another way you can actually kind of argue or advocate for your client as far as any kind of time or any kind of conviction on the case is going to do him extra harm and extra punishment. In the state situation, obviously you have a little more flexibility, and it's important for any criminal defense lawyer to know a lot of the immigration rules as far as what's going to happen if they take any kind of conviction. Because a lot of times on immigration stuff, as you're probably aware, if you just taking a deferred on some kind of cases, it depends on the timeline as far as what you're taking is going to affect his immigration status as much as what he's pleading to. So a lot of attorneys get in that pitfall where they say, oh, I've got a great deal, I've got it deferred for 5 years or 10 years. Problem is, under the immigration rules, you can get stuck, and that can be deportable, as opposed to doing a short jail sentence sometimes where it's not.
Less than a year.
Yeah, where it's not. So it's important on those kinds of situations, to basically look at it case by case.
Well, and I wanted to just take a minute to recognize your dad, Mr. McMains, Russell.
That's correct.
And he was a great trial lawyer and a pillar of our community and the legal system. What did he instill in you in your practice?
I think just to be yourself. I think you can't go be somebody else, and it's important to develop your own type style and to not try to be fake in front of a jury or in front of a judge. I think if you're your own personality, if you're trying to be fake and trying to act like some TV lawyer, they're going to see right through it. And I think just being genuine. And when you heard him argue in the Supreme Court or everywhere else, you just kind of heard how much he knew about the case and how much he cared about the case. And he had this kind of deep voice that and
it was a growl.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean,
but
it was just one of those genuine things where he knew it, and the way he advocated, he believed in what he was talking about, no matter what kind of point. And I think that's the thing, as a client or with a client or as a lawyer, you have to be genuine, in front of a judge or a jury to be able to win. Steve
McMains on federal criminal practice. I want to thank you for coming by. And how can they get a hold of you if they have any other questions or concerns on federal criminal law or any other issues?
Office number is 361-884-4488.
And that's 361?
884-4488.
All right, and that was Steve McMains, and we also want to thank Ms. Greenberg for coming on. This is Attorney Joe Flores for South Texas Crossfire. Join us for another episode here pretty soon. Thank you, and God bless.